Despicable Me 4 was a letdown, the weakest entry in the series in my opinion, which is really saying something because I thought that the third film was really bad. And today I wanted to talk about why it fails as a movie. As per usual, I'm going to be breaking my analysis into three distinct categories: lack of cohesion, lack of change, and lack of development. If you enjoyed this video, then consider checking out my previous video analyzing the downfall of the Despicable Me franchise and leaving a like and subscribing. Alright, let's get right into the analysis. One of the most glaring and obvious flaws in Despicable Me 4 is the way that all of the elements of the film lack any type of cohesion together. The film felt like an assortment of short episodes haphazardly thrown together, rather than a coherent, well-planned feature-length narrative. A good way to visualize this is to think about the movie like a jigsaw puzzle, with each storyline representing a different piece of that puzzle. There's a couple pieces that relate to the central plot with Gru and his family being hunted by Maxime Laval. Then there's a piece with Gru having issues with his son. Agnes and Edith have their own puzzle piece, the Mega Minions have their piece, Lucy has her piece, Maxime and his girlfriend have their own piece, there's a piece for Poppy. Basically, we have all of these pieces, but none of them really fit together. Poppy stealing the honey badger does almost nothing to further the main plot of Gru hiding from Maxime. The Mega Minions get their powers, but it doesn't really affect the story until the very end, where they help to take down Maxime. Agnes and Edith's karate class really adds nothing of substance to the story. If you took it out, nothing would change. Same thing for Lucy's hairdressing shenanigans. It's all just filler. Most of these events either hardly fit together or don't relate to each other at all, and that is just blatantly lazy writing. It's clear that the writers put almost no effort into crafting a clear, compelling, and coherent narrative, and instead focused on trying to just cram as many jokes and gags into the film as possible. And look, I'm not saying that it's wrong to add comedy in your film, but the way that the people behind this movie unnecessarily sacrificed quality for empty humor really speaks volumes to the carelessness and lack of passion behind this film. Take for example the first two films in the franchise. The carnival scene in the first Despicable Me may not directly affect the plot involving the shrink ray and stealing the moon, but it is instrumental in changing Gru's perspective and feeling towards the girls, and ultimately is the catalyst for his eventual decision to take them in permanently. The scene is not just full of comedy, but it also has a function in the story. In the second film, there is a funny scene where Gru and Lucy break into El Macho's restaurant to try to find the PX-41 serum, and the silly shenanigans that take place in that scene are hilarious. But ultimately, the scene is not just great comedy, but it also helps to progress the plot. And it's not just these two scenes. You can go back to just about any sequence from the first two films of the franchise, and practically every scene has importance to either developing the story or developing the characters. However, many scenes in Despicable Me 4 lose that functionality. Lucy totally botches this rich lady's haircut, but it doesn't change or grow her as a person or progress the story with Maxime. 5 minions get superpowers, but then they just proceed to mess around and go on completely unrelated escapades that don't even affect the actual story until the last 5 minutes. Despicable Me 4 has a ton of sequences, but most of them are completely self-contained and unrelated to the story or characters at large. And as a result, the film feels like a collection of completely unrelated shorts rather than a movie, which is okay to do if you're writing for a show or a miniseries, but when writing for a feature film, the events that take place in that film need to have unity or cohesion. They need to build off of each other, change the characters, or introduce new obstacles or solutions. Each scene needs to have functionality, because otherwise each scene just feels pointless. If the events in this scene are not going to have any effect on the rest of the film, then why bother watching this scene at all? It's irrelevant. The scenes in a movie need to work together to tell a story, not tell their own unrelated mini-stories. That's how you end up with a film that feels as pointless as a puzzle with pieces that don't fit together. Have you ever heard the phrase, "a whole lot of nothing"? Well, that phrase perfectly describes Despicable Me 4, and one of the main reasons for that emptiness and meaninglessness is the lack of change found in this movie. If you went to a magic show and the magician had a bunny and a hat, and he put the bunny in the hat and then tapped the hat with his wand and wiggled his fingers around it and told you something magical had happened to the bunny, what would your reaction be if he pulled the bunny out of the hat and the rabbit was exactly the same as before? You would probably be wondering, okay, so if the rabbit is the same, then what was the point of the magic trick? That is exactly the same case as Despicable Me 4. We get the illusion of something happening, the film is full of busyness, Gru has to help Poppy steal a honey badger, Lucy has to run away from this lady in a grocery store, the Mega Minions cause havoc with their new powers, but none of this wiggling of the fingers, if you will, actually causes anything to happen. It's all meaningless visual stimulation. There's no point to it. The thing about most good stories is that they have a point to them. The characters need to progress and change as they go along their journey. However, like I mentioned in my last review, pretty much every single character in this movie is the exact same by the end of it. The story we just watched has no effect on the characters at all. So therefore, why did we even need to see it? Gru never learns a lesson or grows from a character flaw he had. He just stays stagnant throughout the whole film. The same goes for all the other characters like Lucy and the girls. None of them go through any sort of development, so they just emerge at the end of the film as the exact same people they were before. That's lame. That's boring. And worst of all, if nothing significant happens during your movie, then the movie itself does not really matter. And if your movie doesn't matter, then why should people pay to go see it? It's as worthless as paying to go to a magic show where a lame magician does all of this empty visual stimulation, but in the end, the magic trick actually did nothing. Finally, let's turn our attention to the third category, which is a lack of development in the plot. Allow me to use an analogy. Imagine for a second that you were on a poorly designed roller coaster, and right at the start, you climbed up the giant hill, getting ready for the big drop. But then the car just froze at the top and didn't move for 50 minutes. Then the car finally went down a small slope and then just came to an immediate halt and the ride was over. Would you have felt like that ride was worth your time? The narrative in Despicable Me 4 feels like the roller coaster I just described. The beginning sets up this story with exciting potential, but then for the next 50 minutes or so, the potentially cool plot is just put on hold and the characters get into completely unrelated events that do almost nothing to further the plot that was set up earlier in the movie. Then at the end of the film, the setups at the beginning of the film are just rapidly paid off and the film is over. That is not how you write a film, because the middle is supposed to be where stakes are raised, situations complicate, where all of the setups established at the beginning are developed throughout the middle and are finally rewardingly paid off at the end. However, Despicable Me 4 just disregards this conventional story structure, but rather than replacing it with an effective one, it just pushes out an incomplete version of the conventional story structure. The reason that the payoffs at the end of this movie feel weak and empty is because they were never built into properly. The reason why that scene where Gru's son rescues him from Maximie feels like a letdown is because it was never properly built into. Throughout the whole movie, there was hardly any development in the relationship between Gru and his son. So when Gru's son just all of a sudden decides to save his dad and be nice to him at the end of the movie, that feels cheap. It doesn't hold the weight that it should have, and that's because it wasn't properly developed throughout the narrative. Much in the same way, the rest of the setups at the beginning of this film are left undeveloped throughout the entire movie, and then just are immediately paid off at the end of the film. The beginning establishes Maximie breaking out of prison and coming after Gru, but then that setup never really gets developed and is just instantly paid off at the end of the film in their final confrontation. Imagine how much more compelling that final encounter could have been if we saw glimpses of Maximie continually getting closer to finding Gru. Maybe there's a scene where he's spotted in the neighborhood, and it leads to a tense scene where Crew and the family have to come up with an excuse to hide, leading to a funny interaction with their neighbors. What I'm essentially getting at here is that the progression of the plot and the development of the story happening in the middle of the narrative are what gives weight and meaning to the payoffs in the climax. So when the middle of Despicable Me 4 is just full of irrelevant and random shenanigans that don't develop or progress the plot set up at the start of the film, then when that plot finally reaches its conclusion, it doesn't feel that exciting or rewarding, but instead it feels as worthless and as boring as a simple roller coaster that gets frozen right before a small drop. Hopefully I was able to convey the many flaws of Despicable Me 4 in a clear and concise way so that you could learn a thing or two about what to avoid when writing a film. It's truly sad to see this franchise that had very strong and high quality movies like the first two Despicable Me's drop off to this low effort, lazy sludge. And if you want to get a sense of just how far that fall off from the first two films is, then you can check out my previous video on the subject. Link will be in the description. And if you enjoyed this video, then you'd probably enjoy my other content. So be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more quality videos, and check out some of those other videos on my channel. Anyways, I've been Ghost Toast, your ghost host, and I'll catch you all on the next one. Have a great day.